Hello team, welcome back. It's been so long. Welcome to the second part of my second edition of beginner tutorial series. Today we're sculpting a lily flower. If you're new, don't be. Go back and watch the first part of this video to catch yourself up to speed. Right now we are looking at this beautiful lily sculpt that we started with in the first part. And today we're going to be texturing it, painting it, and getting the whole thing wrapped up today. In the first part of this video, we got almost all the way through the sculpting part of our journey here today. And in this video, we have a lot of ground to cover. We're going to be texturing, painting, adding the stamen, the stem, and doing a few more little tips and tricks to make this flower come to life today. We have a lot of ground to cover in this video, so buckle up, stay tuned, and let's do it. All right, so we are going to start here with throwing on a basic splattery texture onto our petal surface, just to give it sort of an initial hit of dimension. To do so, we're going to be using the stamp tool. If you're unfamiliar, I have a full breakdown that I'll link above of this tool. It's one of my favorite tools, and we're going to be using that today for our initial texturing. Now, as you've maybe seen before, I have a good catalog of alphas here in my stamp tool. I'll put a link below of the alpha that we're going to be using today, which is just this sort of splattery dotted texture. And while we're in the stamp tool, you can change it here in this lower left-hand portion of the context menu. And once you download the image that I have linked below, you can just import it here with this import button. So I'm going to select that image that we have and just have my main petal selected. I'm going to zoom out a little bit just so that I have some space to work with, and adjust my intensity down to the lowest it can go at 1%. Then I'm going to start with my brush in the middle of the flower and just pull outwards until that alpha gets to a scale that I'm liking. And I'm again using the Apple Pencil, so I'm able to sort of twist it to adjust its placement a bit. I'm going to leave it somewhere around there. We're looking for something kind of like that. I can also come up to my geometry menu where you can see this little stack here and just subdivide my model. I'll subdivide it twice just so that I have a bit more of a higher resolution while I'm texturing. Now back in my top view and zooming out, I'm going to select one of my lower petals and just do the exact same thing. So I'm going to start from the middle, drag out until I get a scale that I like, and then come up to my geometry menu and subdivide. There we go. We have a very basic noisy texture on our petals. Now selecting back on our main upper petal here, I'm going to do a little bit of smoothing before I continue. That middle crease that we made earlier is a little bit deeper than I prefer, so I'm just going to go along and smooth that middle portion out. I'm also going to smooth along the edges because I don't really want that noisy texture on the edges of my petal. And remember that we now have symmetry disabled, so you are going to have to work on both sides of the model. So now we really just have that noisy texture in those sort of middle plane areas of our petal. Now I'm wanting to do a little bit more sculpting here using the Move tool, just to add a little bit more of that frilly edge that we had to begin with that I'm a fan of. So I'm going to find a good angle here, and just with a sort of medium-sized brush, I'm going to pull upwards and downwards on this edge, just like we were before, just to sort of reinforce some of those areas. After we did the extraction earlier, this edge got pretty smooth, so just wanting to add a little bit of that detail back. And again, just being sure that you're working on both sides of the petal and one side isn't falling behind. I get so used to symmetry that sometimes I forget to do this, so be sure you're staying on top of it. And we also lost a little bit of that downward tip that we had before. So I'm going to zoom out a bit and increase my scale to just curl down that tip and make it a little bit pointier. And there we go. That's looking pretty good. I want to add a little bit more of a striping to the petal to have a little bit more movement outwards. So to do so, I'm going to come back to my crease tool like we used earlier. And again, just using a pretty low intensity and a fairly large scale of my radius. I'm just doing short strokes here and sort of flicking my pencil outwards to make these shapes. And again, just doing it to both sides here to make it even and working my way upwards. I'm going to come back to my smooth tool to smooth out this middle area a little bit more, then come back to my crease to add a couple deeper indents that move upwards. All right, I think that's looking pretty convincing. We want to add a similar effect to the lower petals that we're making. So I'm going to select that lower petal and just rinse and repeat that process, starting with my smooth tool along the center line and the edges, and then moving to the move tool with a smaller size to add back some of that frill that we had earlier to the edge, being sure that I do it along both sides of my model, like so. And then just jumping into the crease tool, again with a fairly low intensity and medium size, and just flicking some creases along my model. And be sure that your symmetry is turned off before you are doing this in case you didn't turn it off earlier, but just adding a little bit of movement downwards down the petal. All right, this is looking well textured. Also be sure to come to a lower perspective because you can see here in my upper petal, I'm breaking through this bottom edge a little bit. So you just want to be sure that you're checking things again from all angles to be sure that this isn't happening. So to remedy this, I'm just going to use the smooth tool with a pretty small radius and just smooth out these areas that are clipping through. All right, so we are ready to add a little bit more geometry into our scene. We're going to be adding the stamen of the flowers. This is one of the more iconic parts of the lily, I feel, so it's a pretty important aspect. Looking at my reference here, it looks like the stamen sort of splits into several pieces. We're just going to be adding 2 in today's sculpt. But with all of this, feel free to freestyle at your own pace. All right, so to make this stamen, we could take a few different approaches, but today we're just going to be using the tube tool because it'll just go really fast. So I'm just going to hit the home icon next to my snap cube to center my model and get a front view. And in my tool panel, I'm going to scroll down until I find this tube tool and select that. And be sure that I have the curve mode selected in the left-hand side. All right, now I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, and the tube is built by just drawing a curve. It's pretty straightforward. So we're going to draw in a curve here, starting from the base of our flower and just working upwards and following the shape of the stamen in our reference. So I'm going to tap and hold and drag upwards. You can see that this white line will follow where you go, and just release to confirm. By default, it populated a lot of points along this curve for my tube. We really don't need that many control points. So to collapse any of these, since we don't need that many, you can just drag one into the one next to it, like so, and it will turn red and they'll combine into one. So I can go along my tube here from top to bottom and just combine some of these together to streamline the amount of control points that I have and evenly space them as much as I can. That's looking much more appropriate. And you can see that it started a bit off center. So I'm in the front view here. I can just drag over these points to be near center, like so. Then switch to a right view and do the same just to be sure that things are centered. You can see now how that sphere that we added in the center is pretty helpful. And that's about the placement that we're wanting. I want it to have a bit more of a natural curve to it. So in my front view here, I'm just going to drag over some of these points to give it a bit more of a unique shape, like so. I'm going to go for something like this. And I can adjust the radius of the tube by dragging on this little orange control point at the bottom. So I'm going to make it a little bit thinner like so. And I actually want the base of the stamen to be thicker than the upper part of the stamen. So I can just tap on this radius button in the bottom context menu that we have, and it will give me a control point at the top and the bottom. So using the bottom control point, I can make it a bit thicker, and it will add a nice taper to my curve, like so. This is looking pretty good. I have a good curve from this front angle, but I want to be sure that it's curving from other angles as well. So I'm going to jump into my right view and just adjust the curve a bit more from this angle so that things feel really organic. Just continue adjusting until you are happy with it. Now at this point we are ready to validate, but before we do so, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this tube so that we can build our second stamen before we validate anything and we can keep editing. So I'm going to come up to my scene breakdown. With my tube selected, I'm just going to hit clone. And now we have a second one in the same place. I'm going to jump back to my home view and adjust this second curve to go in the direction that I'm picturing, and just try to keep things as natural as possible. Then jump to the right view and do the same thing, just adjusting the curve until you're happy. And check it from other angles to see if anything feels off. I can see from the top view I want things to be a bit more separated, so I'm just going to pull them apart a bit, like so. And I think that's looking pretty good. I know I said I was just going to do 2, but I'm actually feeling like doing 3. So I'm going to go up to my scene breakdown and make one more clone of this second version. And I'm just going to go back to my home view and adjust those curves again to make a third version that's shorter and over on this left side. And I'm going to make it a little bit skinnier as well. Then jump to your right hand view and again, just continue adjusting until you're happy with it. This top view is helpful to see how things are interacting and see if you like where it's going. I think that's looking pretty good. Keep in mind that you can also add additional control points by just tapping along the curve where you want the handle to be. So I want one more around here to make the top stick outwards. So I'm just going to tap to make a new control point and bring it up to make that curve point outwards a bit. All right, things are looking really nice. Now I'm going to come up to my scene breakdown. And of course I can just validate these tubes, but I want to keep backups of all of this before I continue. So with all 3 of my tubes selected, I'm going to hit clone and just move the 3 of these into my backups folder. For me, that was tube 3, 4, and 5. And then just be sure that you have none of them selected and hide the backup group. So now I have my main 3 tubes selected. I'm going to go through one by one and validate each of them, starting with the tall one, moving to the medium, and then validating my shortest one. So now I have my 3 stamens. I want these to be in a separate group from the petals just to keep things a little bit more organized. So I'm going to select the 3 of them and just tap the add button and add another group and title it stamen, like so, and collapse it. Now, the last thing that we'll be adding to the scene here is the little caps on top of the stamens. Those little brown fuzzy caps. Honestly, don't know what they're called. So with our stamen group selected, because we want our new piece to be included in this stamen group, we're going to hit the add button again, and we're going to start with a quad sphere, just a regular quad sphere, and use the gumball to bring it upwards and scale it down a bit. And we can go ahead and validate it as is. And we want to zoom into this quickly, so we can just use this little frame icon near the snap cube to jump to it. And we can use the move tool to adjust the shape. I'm going to move into a top view to do this, and my symmetry is enabled by default, which is just fine. And I'm just going to pull out one end to be thicker and taper that other end to be pretty thin, sort of like a bike seat shape. Then I want to flatten the bottom a little bit, so I'm just going to bring this up to make it less round and keep the back pretty thick like so. It really is the shape of a bike seat. That's pretty accurate. All right, easy enough. We're just going to call it there. And the last thing that we're going to do to this piece is just give it a little bit of texture. So I'm going to come back to my stamp tool, and I'll just use that same spotted alpha that we used before with a fairly low intensity. and just tap and drag outwards to give it a little bit of texture. And I'm just going to do it once more to add a little bit more. And there we go. We have this little textured tip for the stamens. Now we can use the gizmo to put it in place, which can be a little tricky here, to be honest, since things are kind of oddly angled, but just do your best and take your time here. I'll probably just speed this up because it's probably going to take me a minute to get it in the right place too. All right, so once you get the first one into place, then you can just come up to the scene breakdown menu and make a clone of it to add to the lower one as well. So take your time to get that one in place as well. All right, I think this is starting to look pretty believable. Just want to be sure that they're touching each other at least and are in relatively the right location. Now you'll notice that I didn't do one on the longest stamen that we have. This is because it's not actually going to have a tip. If you look in our reference photo, the longest piece of the stamen has this little cap on top of it, and it's a bit thicker than the rest. So we're going to mimic that here. I'm just going to tap on my longest tube to select it and zoom into the tip there. I'm going to start with smoothing out that hard edge around the top with my smooth tool, and then moving into my inflate tool to make this sort of bulbous shape on the end of it. Just bring it out a little bit like so. Keeping it nice and round is just fine. I'm going to use the move tool as well, just to make things a little bit wider and more natural looking, like so. Now, if you zoom out, you'll see that our lily is starting to look really convincing. My stamens, I still think, are looking a little bit too clean cut. So I'm just going to be coming in here with the move tool to mix up their shape a little bit. Starting here, I just want to widen the base a little bit so that they're incorporated with each other. Something like that will do, I think. And then just going around and making things look a little bit less predictable. And I'm just sort of jumping from tube to do so. Trust your intuition here. It's called a sculpt after all, so let your sculpting brain take over. Now, the very last step of our sculpting and texturing here is just to add a little bit of banding to these stamen pieces to give them a little bit of surface texture. So I'm going to be going in with the crease tool again and just doing some small strokes along the surface to give it a little bit of texture and dimension. If your crease isn't showing up very well like mine, you might want to up your polygon count a little bit to give you a higher resolution. So with my stamen selected, I'm going to come up to my geometry menu as we know, and just subdivide once to give things a little bit more geometry to play around with. So now I've subdivided all three of those, and my crease should show up a little bit better. So I'm just going to go along and do the same sort of flicking motion that we did with the petals to just add a little bit of dimension to these surfaces. This will add a lot to the realism once we see things lit and textured at the end. All right, our texturing is complete. Now we can move on to the fun part, which is painting. I'm really excited to show this to you today. If you are only wanting to sculpt for the purpose of 3D printing, then you can honestly stop here and skip ahead a little bit. At the end of the video, I'll be showing you how to combine these together a little bit more seamlessly, so you'll want to stay tuned for that, but you might not care so much about painting. Either way, I recommend you stay through this part of the tutorial because it will be really fun. And we'll just show you sort of the power of Nomad Sculpt. All right, it is painting time. Now, in order to start painting, there's a few things that we have to consider first. The first of those being our lighting situation. So far, we've been working with this matte cap that you can see here, which has been great for our sculpting process to help us get a really even understanding of what exactly we're doing to our surfaces. But now that we're focusing more on color and composition and things like that, we want to switch into a more realistic lighting setup that's a bit more uneven and natural. To do so, I'm going to return to this sun-shaped icon in my top left menu and just transfer over from this toggled matte cap mode to the one just left of it, lit PBR. You can see already the dramatic transformation of the lighting in our scene. This lighting and color temperature is controlled by the environment that you have selected, which you can change here by just tapping on it and choosing from this menu of options. These are called HDRIs, and they're just spherical images that project light onto your object. And you can see they all offer different things in terms of color temperature and lighting placement. I'm just gonna go with this artist workshop that's in the upper right of the options and close out of that menu. Now, the only other thing that I'm gonna do in terms of lighting for now is just add one light that will be above our object and beam downwards, just to help with our color accuracy and so we can see what we're doing a little bit better. And I can add that from the scene breakdown menu, but I can also do it from this shading tab, which is just easier. So I'm just gonna tap add light and it will add a light to my scene. And you can see that it's populated it in here. So I'm just gonna drag it upwards so that it's above my object and point this arrow downwards towards my flower. This is one lighting type called directional lighting, and you can choose from other ones in this lower context menu, as you please. But we'll just stick with that for now. It's default, it's easy, and I'm cool with it, so we're good. And we can start painting our first petal. So I'm gonna tap on this upper petal to select it, and just get a good sort of upper view on it, like so. And we're going to navigate to the paint tool over here in my toolbar with this little orange sort of stripe on it. Now I can see what colors of material I'm choosing in this lower left-hand side. Again, just using my reference, I'm gonna want this sort of fuchsia pink color is sort of the classic lily color, so that's what we're gonna go with. You can just tap on this little cube that it shows you as a preview, and it will open up this stroke painting preview tab where you have all kinds of different settings to choose from. The main ones being roughness, metalness, opacity, and of course your color picker. As you cycle through colors in the color picker, you can see that it will preview your material on the object itself, which is a really helpful way to visualize. So we're gonna pick this sort of purpley pink color and turn up the volume on its saturation. Make it a little bit darker, and we wanna find a color around here-ish. And we're gonna control the roughness slider to be fairly rough, somewhere around 50%. And my metalness, I'm gonna turn up just slightly to give it a little bit of a sheen and depth. And our opacity is good at 1. Now we can paint the entire object pink, so I'm just going to hit this paint all button here under my preview, and it will paint our petal pink. While we have this material selected, I'm gonna go to the lower petal to select that, and just go ahead and hit paint all again to make those petals pink as well, just to give us sort of a basic starting point. All right, so selecting back on my upper petal and zooming in a bit, you could very well just go in and start painting on the surface, but I'm gonna be using my layers panel to do so. If you watched my skull beginner video, then you remember me touching on this very briefly as a second layers panel that works differently from our scene breakdown. This is the type of application that you'll use this layers panel for. You can find it up here in the top right-hand menu bar. It's this little stack of squares. You can tap on that and you see the title of layers. We've been working so far on the base layer, which is now just our pink base, but we can tap on add layer, and now we can start to stack these layers of color and edit them individually. This will help us get a really custom look, especially since we're using something that has so many different shades and things going on. It will make our life way easier. So now we're in this second layer. I can just close out of that layers stack. And I think we'll start with painting the edges of our petals white, as I can see in my reference. So I'm just gonna be using that same material picker down here in the left-hand side. And I'm just going to change my color to something much paler, but still a little bit in that pink realm, just to color match a little bit better. And I'm going to start at the bottom here with a fairly small brush and just freely paint along the edges of my petal. And just work my way all the way around to make this outer rim of white. Being sure to work on both sides so that things are even, and not worrying too much about being perfect just yet. I can also switch over my view to see the tip of the petal a little bit better, and I'm just going to add a little bit of extra white to this tip area for us to work with. Now I'm going to return to this sort of top view that I had, and using a bit of a smaller brush, I'm going to add this sort of feathered edge to make the transition easier to work with later, just by doing a series of small strokes along this transition line to get a smoother finish later on once I start to smudge things together. Just working my way all the way around like so. I know it looks really funny so far, but just trust the process here, I promise. I'm also going to do a similar thing with erasing to get the start of a feathered edge here. So I can toggle on my eraser in the far left-hand side here. I can toggle it on like so. And I'm just going to work subtractively to give things a little bit of a feather, especially just at the top where I went a little overboard on my line, and in some of these areas where I just want to add a little bit more variation. All right, I'm happy with the color placement so far. Now we'll start to see things really come to life when we start to smudge this color, which you can find just under the paint tool in your toolbar. And I'm just going to close out of this stroke painting tab for now so that I can see what I'm doing more clearly. And I'm just going to go along this transition and flick my cursor back and forth to smudge things inward and outward and get a really natural transition. Just flicking inward and outward to smudge out this white edge and soften it a bit. This is a lot like a blur tool that you might be used to in something like Photoshop, or the similarly named smudge inside of Procreate. Just going along the entire edge and softening up that transition. All right, you can keep going until you're happy with it, and feel free to check from different angles to see how your transition is looking. Starting to feel happy with this. I think my white is encroaching a little bit too far, so I'm going to continue to use the smudge to just push it backwards and give that pink a little bit more room to breathe in the middle. So I'm just working my way around and pushing that white a little bit further back towards the edge, leaving some inconsistencies to make things feel a little bit more realistic. All right, I think I'm happy with that so far. We're now going to get to add some of those deeper purple areas that have the spots and also the center line that has a sort of deeper burgundy color. So I'm going to come back up to my layers panel and add a layer that will contain these darker shades, and return to my paint tool. Then open up that material selection and go for a more reddish hue that has this deep purple shade that I'm seeing in my reference. Somewhere around there I think will be good. For this shade, I'm going to turn my metalness up just to give my material a bit more interest and add a little bit to my roughness to counteract that, and then I can close out of that panel. And again, we're in the paint tool here. Be sure that your eraser is not toggled, because we did have it toggled before, and that you're in that new layer that we just created. And I think we'll start with the center line here, just working with small flicks of paint to apply this burgundy color along the center line. Remember that we're going to be diffusing this with the smudge tool, so it's really just about general placement and less about softness. So I think I want it to get a bit thicker around this middle portion and thin out along the top and the edges. So I'm going to set myself up for success there, like so. And I'm going to go ahead and smudge this area out. So again, I'm just working in flicks backwards and forwards just to give myself a bit of interest and be sure that things are smudging equally into each other. And I'll try to leave the middle a bit darker and denser like that. The color that I picked is a little bit too dark and not quite as saturated as I'm seeing in my reference. So I'm actually going to come in here and just adjust my color a bit, make it a bit lighter and a bit more saturated, and just return to my paint tool and add a sort of second coat along the middle that will have this proper color, and then smudge that out a bit as well. All right, that's starting to look pretty nice. Now let's return to this top view, come up to our layers panel and add another layer for the spots. And back in my paint tool here, I'm gonna lower the size of my brush a bit and just start to add these spots like I'm seeing in my reference. The placement of these really depends on how your sculpt is turning out. It's really up to you. I'm just sort of starting towards the middle and having them fan out a bit towards the edge, being sure that I have some good variation in scale, and just applying them to both sides and going pretty much all the way towards the edge. I'm seeing in my reference that they're mainly concentrated towards the bottom of the petal, so I'm going to be sure that I have some more towards the lower portion. So just follow your heart here. Keep going until you feel like you have enough. And then again, just coming to the smudge tool with a smaller brush than we were using before, and just smudge out these little spots so that they're less pronounced. And you can go into some of these and smudge them even extra so that they start to vanish a little bit more than others to get some good variation in texture. I'm going to go along and smudge these. I'll speed up this portion of the video, so just keep smudging, keep doing your thing. Just being sure that you hit all of them here and that you don't leave any random little sharp spots. All right, this is looking okay, but they're a little bit too uniform, so I'm just going to come in and buff some of these out even more so that there's more variation in their opacity. I think that's looking all right. Now there's one more main layer that I'm wanting to add to this painting job, and that's an even brighter pink sort of coming from the middle underneath where the spots are. So up in my layers panel, I'm gonna add one more layer and move it below those other two that contained our darker colors. And here I'm looking for more of a true hot pink color. I'm going to turn down the metalness on that and bring the roughness back down a bit and just find a color similar to this of a hot, hot pink. Then close that stroke painting tab, return to my paint tool, and I'm just going to add this sort of wash of hot pink across the middle of the petal in a placement similar to this. And I think I'm going to layer it with an even more reddish hue in some of these areas just to add some variation to my color. Just sort of mixing those together freely and not being too precious about it. And then coming in with my smudge tool once again and just smudging out these edges to make it more uniform. This time I'm going in a really upward motion to try and get this color to have some more banding than the other two did, upwards towards the tip of the flower. All right, this is looking pretty great so far. I'm gonna add one more layer of paint to this. Again, this is all up to you, the way that you organize these layers and this paint, but I'm just gonna add one more upper layer here that I like to just add some sort of final details all within the same layer. So I'm going to return to my paint tool and just add any smaller details that I would like to add. Here I'm going to add a bit of white to the edge to bring back that stark white along the edge that we've sort of lost from our smudging. So I'm just going all the way around the edge with that. And I would also like to add some sharper details to the center line of our flower. So I'm going to open up my stroke painting tab and find a deep burgundy shade again and just add some sharper lines across that middle portion. And I can smudge those out a bit as needed, but again, I don't want to smudge this layer too much because I want things to stay pretty sharp, but I will soften the edge just a bit as I go around. And I think that's looking pretty convincing. One thing I would like to do with these spots is just change their blending mode a bit so that they feel less separated from everything else. So I'm going to find my layer with the spots, which was my layer 2. Of course, you can name these, I just haven't taken the moment to. And you can change their blending mode inside of these little teardrop icons. It will open up this panel, which will have some terms you're familiar with if you've used something like Photoshop or Procreate, where you can darken, multiply, linear burn, all of those sort of things. With the darker areas of this sculpt, I tend to prefer the overlay mode, so that's what I'm gonna go with. All right, so I think things are starting to look pretty believable here. I'm going to go in and do the exact same process on our lower petals, and then we'll move on into our finishing touches. I'm going to speed this up a bit here, but it really is just more of the same, just rinse and repeat the process we just did. Keep in mind that when you are picking textures and colors for this new petal that we're painting, in this stroke painting menu, you can see that there's a little eyedropper icon next to this material preview that you have. If you tap on that eyedropper, then you can tap on our previously painted flower to pick out the colors and materials that are represented wherever you're eyedropping from, and then be able to paint with that same material. So here I can pick that white color that we used on the edge, and then now I'm able to paint with the same material as before. This makes it really easy when you're trying to do multiples of things like this, so just keep in mind that that's an option. But yeah, I'll probably speed up this part of this video a bit. It really is just more of the same. We're gonna paint the outside white and smudge it, then pick this inside sort of purple shade and make a layer on the inside and smudge that out as well. Then of course make our little spots and smudge those a bit. And lastly, add those harsher lines that we had before with a smaller brush. And boom, just like that, we have a beautifully painted lily flower. The only thing we're missing is the painting on the stamens, which is going to be very, very straightforward. So let's go back to our paintbrush here and be sure that we have one of them selected. And in our material picker here, we are looking for something greenish yellow in color and pretty bright. Something around here. It's a pretty tricky color to match, but this will be fine for today. And just hit paint all to paint the entire stem. Then we will select the other two and just rinse and repeat, hitting paint all to paint the entire thing. And we're going to do a little bit of hand painting on these with a more vibrant green shade that's a bit darker as well. On this taller one, I'm just going to be coming in here and adding a little bit below the head, like so, and just bringing it down a bit, like this. My lighting is a bit dark, but I hope you can see it okay. And I'm just going to add a little bit of striping going down the stem, like so. You can, of course, get way more into the details than I am, but this is just going to be good enough for me for now. And then, of course, I'm going to come in with my smudge tool and just smudge those colors together to make them a little bit more seamless. Great. That gave me some good inconsistencies, and I'm really liking the way things are looking. I'm going to add a little bit of a inconsistency at the top as well, just to add some depth, and we're good to go. I'm going to do the same thing to these other two tubes of the stem, just adding a little bit of striping to make them a little bit more inconsistent. All right, now one more little area to paint here is the tips of these stamen pieces. So I'm going to come back to my paint tool, and my color picker here, I'm going to go for a reddish brown color, something like this. And I'm going to be sure that I turn my roughness up and my metalness off, and just hit paint all. Then select the other tip and hit paint all on that as well. And then with that color still active in my paintbrush, I'm going to select the tubes that go into those tips. And I'm just going to paint in some of that brown color along the end of those stems in these areas where they transition into the tip. And this is going to give me a really natural look in this transition area. I'm going to do the same to this other stem here, just adding a little bit of a bleeding of that brown color down the side. Again, navigating in this middle area is pretty difficult, so you're not the only one trying to struggle to see this inside piece. And then, of course, I'm just coming in with my smudge tool to buff that out a little bit and make it an even transition of color. And doing the same to that lower piece. Being sure to hit all of the sides, even though they're a little bit hard to reach sometimes, like this one is impossible to find, but I will find a way. Our lily is looking beautifully painted and so great. Now there's a few more things to finish up here, and then we will edit our lighting a bit and we will be done with this project. So bear with me here, we're so close. Now earlier we put this sphere in the bottom here. Let's go ahead and select that and move back to our move tool. And I'm just going to pull out the sides of the sphere to match the silhouette of the taper of my flower, and then pull down on the bottom a little bit to make a rounded shape. And then come to my right view and just do the same thing, just trying to match the shape with the taper of the flowers, so that it acts like a little cap to the bottom of my pieces. While we're down here, it's a good time to also adjust any of the bottom painting that we have. You can see here that it's looking a little rough down here, so I'm just going to use the smudge brush to buff out some of these areas that are looking kind of crunchy, and being sure that there's a smooth transition along the bottom of these petals. All right, now that we have that in place, we will be ready to merge all of these together in order to send them into other programs really easily. But first, I forgot one area of painting that I want to do super quick before we uninstance and mess everything up here, which is just to add a little bit of green around where the stamen is that bleeds into those petal shapes to make everything really homogeneous and unify it together. So let's do that super quick, and then we can move on into the next phase here. So let's come back to our paint tool, and with our big petal selected in my top view, I'm going to add a new layer since that's what we've been working with in our painting. So I'm going to add a new layer, and in my material picker, I can use that eyedropper that I mentioned to pick the same material that we used on the stamen. Now I can close out of that, and I just want to add this sort of rip of green through the middle of those petals, something like that. And be sure to look at it from other angles to be sure that you are hitting all the parts that you're wanting to across the middle of the petals, something like this. And I like that in my reference, there's a few different shades of green in this specific area. So I'm going to go ahead and add those. Coming in my material picker, I'm going to pick more of a vibrant yellow color to add around the edges of this painted area. Something like this, I think, will be a good transition shade for when we smudge it out. And also there's a darker green that lives right in the middle of both of these. So I'm going to pick something like this and just add it along the very center of those leafy pieces. This is going to make a big difference. So let's come in here with our smudge tool, and like before, we're just going to smudge out these colors to mix with each other and make things really unified. You'll notice that I'm jumping between the three petals since they have some better angles that I can access. And I'm just buffing out these colors to make them really unified. And there we go. Now our painting is actually officially done. Thank God. So we can move into the final phases of our sculpt today. All right, so turning our attention back to this little middle piece that we've added, what we want to do is combine all of our pieces together, or Boolean them together, so that when we move them into another program, then they're one unified piece. Especially if you're wanting to 3D print this flower like I intend to, then you want it to be one unified piece to not confuse the slicing softwares that you might be sending them to, or the game engine if you're intending to render these or something. Of course, if you want to keep the petals separately for animation purposes, go ahead and do that. But either way, we have one more step to do, which is to separate these petals and make them a little bit more independent of each other. So we are going to come up here to our layers stack, and you can see that we're still working inside of these two radial systems with our petal shapes. I want to create backups for these, so I'm going to select all 4 of these layers here of both radial systems and the parent petals that live inside of those systems, and just hit clone. And then I'm going to add a new group that contains those and just title this new group radial backups, like so. And I'll just throw it into our backups folder with everything else. Now, what I want to do is break up these radial systems so that I can edit the petals individually. Because right now we've been working with perfect symmetry, which has been really helpful for painting, but we want these petals to feel independent from each other and like they're not all identical. So to do that, I'm just going to select the radial system in my layer stack. And in this context menu at the bottom, I'm just going to hit validate, like we do with our shapes. It's going to make sure that I'm doing what I want to be doing, and I want to do this, so I'm just going to hit confirm. And now you can see that that radial group has now turned into an actual group. It's just a layer stack with 3 independent petal pieces. Now I'm going to be able to edit these individually and get a really custom look. So I'm going to do the same with the second radial system, just selecting it and hitting validate, confirming OK, and now I have 2 separate groups of my 3 petal systems. So now we just want to customize these a little bit and give them a little bit more variation in their shape. So I'll start with this petal here with a fairly large move tool, and I'm just going to start to push and pull at the petal shape to change up its form from the original reference. I think this one will be a little skinnier on the right side and a little bit longer than the other 2. This one I might make a little bit wider across the middle and curl a little bit less at this central area, and maybe have a pointier tip. And with this last large one, I think I want it to fan pretty far outwards to have a good contrast. So I'm going to get an even bigger brush and just curl this end back even more and move it downwards. Something like that I think will do. Now these are starting to feel really independent. I'm also going to move into a top view here and bring my size of brush back down, and just be sure that things are feeling like they're moving in slightly different directions from each other so that things feel unique. This is all sort of arbitrary and really up to you, so just keep going until you're satisfied. I'm going to take the same approach with these smaller petals underneath, just bringing some in to be a little smaller, some out to be a little larger, and changing up their curl patterns a bit. Again, I'm just wanting to get to the point where they still feel like they come from the same flower, but they don't feel like exact copies of each other. All right, somewhere around here has me feeling really confident in my sculpt. Now, in our final few steps here, I'm going to do what I was just talking about, of combining everything together in case you're wanting to 3D print this. I'll show you how to do that. Luckily, when you combine things together inside of Nomad, they will not lose their painting, so that's nice. I'm going to save my file before I move any further. And in my layer stack, I want to create one more backup of these rearranged petal shapes before I unify everything. So I'm going to clone all of this and add it to a new group titled Unique Petal Backup, and move that into my backups folder. Now again, be sure to save your file before you Boolean things together. This is a pretty computationally heavy process, so you want to be sure that you have your file saved. Trust me. All right, now all that's left is to select all of our petals. So the 3 in the top group, the 3 in the bottom group, and our quad sphere that we added as that base piece. And underneath the add button, we're just going to tap this Boolean button and just hit this larger Boolean button. It might take a second to process, but it'll think for a moment and then spit out a beautifully Booleaned new model. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now I want to go ahead and Boolean together all of those stamen pieces before I try to Boolean them with the rest. So I'm going to come into my layer stack and select my 3 tubes that I made, as well as the 2 spheres that act as the tips of those stamen pieces, and do the same thing, just tapping Boolean, then tapping Boolean again. Awesome. Now, with our larger quad sphere selected, as well as that stamen bundle, I'm going to hit Boolean one more time and everything will be combined together seamlessly, hopefully. All right, now our flower is in one big piece. This might be pretty tough for your computer or phone to handle, so if you're not able to, just Boolean things together in groups and then you can combine it in a different software later on. Or just keep them separate. They're totally fine separate. Now that it's one piece, I'm going to come in here with my smooth tool, smooth out this transition between where the sphere was and where the flowers joined in. And you also will notice that my painting will smooth at the same time. Then I'm going to come in here with the paint tool once again. And for my material picker, I'm just going to use the eyedropper to select my pink color and paint the lower part of this sphere. Now, I think for a little bit of added realism, I'm actually going to paint the very bottom of this with a green color. So I'm going to use the eyedropper once again to pick the color of the stamen and get a good view here of my bottom area and just paint the very bottom tip of this that green color, and then use my smudge tool to smudge that color up the sides. Something like that I think looks perfect. All right, now let's set up a place to render. We'll render this out and we will be done for the day. I'm going to be sure to save my file again. And here I think I'm actually going to move into a different view mode so that I can get a more customizable view of my model. So up here in my camera settings in the top left-hand menu, I'm going to switch my rotation mode from turntable to trackball. This will give me a little bit more freedom with my movements so that I can get a really custom angle of this flower. And then I think I'm also going to turn up my perspective view. So in that same menu, I can switch from orthographic to perspective mode so that I can put a little bit more of a fisheye on things and have it less rigid, make it feel more realistic. All right, so just get to a view that you like, and then you can adjust your lighting and your background as much as you'd like. Here, I think I'm just gonna switch our directional light that we added earlier to a spotlight. So in this contextual menu at the bottom, you can just select spot. And now I'm able to control the area that's lit as well as the cone angle with this orange slider. So right now it's pointed right at the center, which I think is just fine. I'm going to move it to a little bit more of an angle so that I have a more dramatic look and turn up the intensity a bit. You can always find your light in your layer stack, which should be inside of its own folder group called lights. And just customize it until you're happy. I think something like this is looking pretty good for me today. I'm also going to do one more little detail just to make things look even nicer, which is just change up my background a little bit. So right now I have it on this gradient from gray to black, but I can change that in this menu next to the camera icon, which is my background settings. I think I'm just going to change this upper color to be a stark black. And I'm going to change the lower color to a lighter whitish color that I think I'm actually going to tone a little bit warm. And you can adjust the factor between this gradient with this slider here until you're happy. And I think that's looking pretty nice. Now I'm just going to save my file one more time and we're done for the day. I'm going to go ahead and render this out. It's in this same Save File menu next to the file icon here under Render. And I'm just going to render with my screen settings. So I'm going to hit Export PNG. It will render, and we have a beautiful render of our lily. We put so much work into making the material, building out these petal shapes, and creating this really custom flower design. I'm really proud of our results here, and if this is only your second, third time sculpting, I really hope you're proud of yourself with this model. I think it looks really beautiful. I'm just going to go ahead and save this image, and we're done for the day. Again, if you are new to Nomad Sculpt, I can't tell you how proud of you I am for making it this far in the video. This is a challenging sculpt. It is not an easy thing to do by any means, and I hope you learned a lot of new techniques and skills along the way. Be sure to check out my tool demos for better breakdowns into how to use all of these tools if there was anything you were confused by along the way, and check out my other beginner tutorial series for even more good stuff. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you'd like to see in the next one, and I will see you soon. Peace out.
Thank you so much for watching. I'm making more videos soon. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.